You know, NATO has no business in Ukraine. Ukraine is not member of NATO, neither Russia. And my job is to keep it as it is.
We should also support President Trump's call to stop buying Russian oil here in Europe as short-sighted to go against the USA. And the guys from Hungary need to hear this clearly.
Tensions within the European Union have reached a boiling point as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy publicly clashes with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban over Hungary's decision to block a €50 billion EU aid package for Ukraine. The funds, intended to sustain Ukraine's economy, rebuild war-torn infrastructure, and ensure essential government services continue to function, were seen as a vital lifeline for a nation still under relentless assault from Russian forces. The decision by Orban to veto the package sent shockwaves across Brussels, creating a diplomatic standoff that many fear could fracture the fragile unity Europe has maintained since the beginning of the war. The confrontation unfolded after a high-stakes EU summit in Brussels, where leaders celebrated a symbolic victory by opening membership talks with Ukraine and Moldova. For Zelenskyy, this was a historic milestone, proof that Ukraine's sacrifices were being recognized by the European community. But his optimism was short-lived. Within hours of the announcement, Hungary exercised its veto power, effectively freezing the aid deal that Ukraine had been counting on for survival. The timing was no coincidence. According to EU diplomats, Orban had been signalling for weeks that he would block the package unless Hungary's own disputes with the European Commission were addressed. Hungary's share of EU funds has been partially suspended over concerns related to corruption, judicial independence, and democratic backsliding. Brussels has accused Orban's government of eroding press freedom, weakening the judiciary, and consolidating power. In response, Orban has framed the withholding of EU funds as political punishment from Brussels, claiming Hungary is being unfairly targeted for defending its national interests. By blocking the Ukraine aid, he forced the EU to confront its internal contradictions, an act that many European leaders interpreted as political blackmail. Orban defended his position in front of reporters after the summit, saying Hungary should not be expected to bear the cost of what he described as unclear and open-ended commitments to Ukraine. He argued that before releasing such a vast amount of money, the EU must present a transparent plan explaining how the funds will be used and for how long the support will continue. "We are not against helping Ukraine," Orban said, "but we must know where this money goes, how it is controlled, and what the long-term strategy is. Europe cannot write blank checks while ignoring its own members' needs." His remarks infuriated Zelenskyy, who accused Hungary of undermining collective European security. From Kiev, Zelenskyy said that while Ukraine values every gesture of support from its European partners, what matters most is the actual delivery of assistance. "Our soldiers are fighting not only for Ukraine's freedom, but for the safety of Europe as a whole," Zelenskyy stated in a televised address. Every delay, every obstruction, every veto, these decisions are not political tactics. They have real consequences. They cost lives inside the EU. Frustration toward Budapest has been mounting for months. Several diplomats, speaking anonymously, said that Orban has repeatedly used his veto as leverage to extract concessions from Brussels. His government's ties with Moscow have also raised suspicions about Hungary's motives. While other EU countries have distanced themselves from Russia, Hungary has maintained energy deals with Moscow and has occasionally criticized Western sanctions. These positions have made Orban one of the most controversial figures in the bloc, seen by some as the EU's Trojan horse. Meanwhile, the stakes for Ukraine could not be higher. Without the €50 billion package, the Ukrainian government faces the possibility of running short on funds to pay salaries, support displaced citizens, and maintain essential services. The aid was also designed to stabilize the economy, rebuild schools and hospitals, and invest in energy infrastructure destroyed by Russian missile strikes. For Zelenskyy's administration, this isn't just about economics. It's about the survival of the state. In private, EU officials have discussed several ways to bypass Hungary's veto. One option involves creating a separate fund through agreements among the other 26 member states. Another is to approve smaller tranches of aid under existing mechanisms that do not require unanimous approval. But these solutions could take months to finalize, and the bureaucratic delays risk leaving Ukraine stranded in the meantime. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has urged all parties to find a path forward rooted in unity and responsibility, emphasizing that Ukraine's struggle is also Europe's fight for democracy and stability. For Orban, however, the issue is as much domestic as it is international. At home, his political base has rallied behind his defiance of Brussels. Hungarian state media have framed Orban as a defender of national sovereignty, standing up against what they portray as EU overreach. His critics, however, accuse him of using Ukraine's suffering as a bargaining chip to secure his own political advantage and unfreeze EU funds tied to corruption reforms. As winter deepens, the humanitarian and military situation in Ukraine grows increasingly dire. Power shortages, damaged infrastructure, and the constant threat of missile attacks have left millions struggling to survive. Every euro from the EU aid package would have gone towards stabilizing the country's budget, strengthening its energy sector, and supporting its soldiers at the front lines. Kyiv's allies in Western Europe argue that failure to deliver on these commitments sends the wrong signal to both allies and adversaries. European leaders are now grappling with a fundamental question: should a single member state have the power to hold the entire union hostage during wartime? Some voices in Brussels have begun calling for reforms to reduce the unanimity rule in critical foreign policy and budget decisions. The Hungarian veto, they say, demonstrates how fragile the EU's unity can be when confronted with national interests that conflict with collective goals. For Zelenskyy, the clash with Orban marks one of his most difficult diplomatic challenges since the war began. He has carefully cultivated relationships with European leaders, but Hungary's obstruction highlights that goodwill alone may not be enough. This is about principles, one Ukrainian advisor said. If Europe cannot stand together when a democracy is under attack, then what is the purpose of the European Union? In the coming weeks, the EU will attempt to revisit the aid decision and negotiate with Hungary behind closed doors. Whether Orban will soften his position remains uncertain. Some diplomats hope pressure from other European capitals will persuade him to relent, while others believe he will continue to stall until Hungary secures additional concessions. For now, the impasse stands as a symbol of the growing divide within the European Union, a union built on consensus but increasingly strained by competing national agendas. For Ukraine, each passing day without the promised aid is another day of uncertainty. For Europe, it is a test of unity, leadership, and moral resolve in a time of war.